So guys, we have got some absolutely massive news towards Battlefield 2042 this morning. The team actually released a 15-minute long video going through essentially everything that they've been working on over the last few months, breaking it all down, showing some actual like almost gameplay of what they've been working on, and the video was 15 minutes long, so there's quite a lot to go through. I'm going to be breaking down the most important parts in this video, and if you guys do want to watch the entire video, I'll leave a link to that down in the description as well. But with that being said, let's get stuck into all the meat and potatoes of this dev update. So obviously it's been a pretty slow month, even probably a slow 2 months really, since we've heard anything from the dev team. We've obviously gotten 2 updates since March, but since March we haven't really heard anything from the team in terms of that sort of community feedback that they've been giving us. They talked about the maps all the way back in March, and then they were meant to be doing the same thing for the specialists, yet we didn't actually hear anything all the way from March, and it is now the 25th of May as I'm recording this. So it's been a pretty slow 2 months, but now I can see why, because they've essentially been working on just like a massive info dump for all of us, and as I said, there is a lot to go through in this one. So they had 4 sort of like sections that they wanted to talk about in this little briefing. The first part was the maps, the second part was more to do with the experience and the modes, the third part was to do with the core gameplay, and then the last part was to do with new content. So I'll go through all of that. There's some really detailed stuff and then some stuff that they kind of just like alluded to, so it's all a bit of a mix of like really detailed content and just like a quick little announcement, if that makes sense. So starting off with the maps, obviously we already knew that they were overhauling some of the maps. They've talked about that in March, like I said, but today they kind of went into even more depth. They showed some, I guess you would call it gameplay, not actual gameplay, but they showed in-engine what the maps are looking like at the moment, mostly Kaleidoscope, as well as a little bit of stuff from Renewal as well. Now I'll show that on screen for you guys at the moment. I'm going to be honest, this all looks a lot better than I actually expected. When they first came out with the news and they showed a couple of those images and stuff, it all looked pretty good, but it didn't look like it was going to be taking place all across the map. All they really showed us was like a few different sections of each map, and although those sections look good, I was still worried that, you know, the vast majority of the map was just going to stay the same. But looking at what they've shown in these videos, there are a lot of sections they didn't talk about previously. They also showed some like overviews of the maps and how they're changing the layout for Conquest and stuff like that, and I must say all of the stuff they showed for the maps definitely looks really solid. Now the only downside for me is that, again, just the pace of the release of these is a little bit slow. Like the Kaleidoscope updates are coming in, I believe, August. I'll show a roadmap that they've sort of given us at the end of the video. That's sort of the last thing they touched on, but it looks like the updates for Kaleidoscope are coming that we definitely know they're in season 1, but it looks like they're coming in August, which isn't terrible because we are also getting a new map. But the updates for Renewal are then coming in season 2, so it is a little bit slow, the pace that they're releasing these updates, but at the end of the day they are like fully overhauling the map, at least in terms of like the cover and all that kind of thing. And so that kind of thing does take time, and I can understand, while also making new maps and everything, it can't be the easiest thing to do. So slightly disappointed on the, I guess, the speed of these updates on the maps, but the updates they're doing to the maps themselves, they look really solid, and not only just like adding more cover, but it looks a lot more gritty. We see on the Kaleidoscope changes that it looks like the city is a bit more abandoned, and like out the front of that main sort of central building there's like a bunch of tire marks, and it looks a lot more like gritty, and this is kind of the thing we're all asking for. So again, they've only showed really like 4 or 5 sections of the map. It's going to be interesting to see if this is like the entire map is done like this, or if it's just these like points of interest. But either way, what they've showed off definitely looks really promising, and the same can be said for Renewal as well. As you guys can see, there's just a lot more cover, and they've even done like the interiors of the buildings and everything. So like I said, it is a little bit sort of bittersweet that this is going to take, you know, still a couple more months from here to actually get these updates, but on the positive side, this all looks really solid. Now moving on to the second section they talked about, which was like the experience and the modes. They kind of just doubled down on the 64 player stuff. So obviously 128 players is still staying for Conquest, and that's completely fine, but they've already in the previous update removed 128 player breakthrough, and personally I think that's a good decision, and I assume that they made this video before that update went live, to be honest, because they kind of almost made that sound like it was news to us, but it actually wasn't, because we've already seen that in game. So they kind of just doubled down on that. There was nothing drastic there. One thing I will say that was pretty drastic to hear about, it wasn't surprising, is that they have officially said Hazard Zone support is essentially ending. The mode will continue to be in the game, they're not going to remove it or anything, but they have essentially said that even new maps and stuff that we get, I don't believe they're being added to Hazard Zone, and it seems like they're not going to be updating the mode at all. So that is kind of sad to see, because that mode did have a lot of potential, honestly. It was really good fun when I have played it, but unfortunately it was just a little bit too shallow. It was kind of like the the same with the entire game really. Like, it was showing good signs at launch, but it just wasn't fleshed out like the entire game as well. So it kind of sucks that that has to die, but at least we know for now that, yeah, Hazard's Zone support is ending, which I do think is a good decision. I literally do not know a single person who's played that since pretty much like the week after launch. So I think it is a good decision to just kind of remove their focus from that. It's more time to spend on all-out warfare and stuff. And although it's sad to see that die, essentially officially die, I think that is definitely a good decision. Now, moving on to the core gameplay stuff that they talked about, the first thing they touched on was the specialists. Now, there was no actual news on like the change of the specialists in terms of what we all want, where, you know, maybe they change it to some sort of class system with the specialists in there or something like that. They didn't touch on any of that, but they did also essentially allude to bigger plans, and they said the reason they haven't talked about any of that yet is essentially because they're still working on it and they're still taking on feedback, and they don't want to, you know, give like a temporary idea that, hey, we're going to do this, and then they continue to work on it and it ends up changing. So they've essentially said, we're not going to talk about that just yet until we get a better idea. So it does seem like there are some actual bigger changes, which to me sounds like they were planning on some smaller changes, and then they've heard that we just want them to be in like classes or something like that, and that seems like that's the way that they will go. They essentially admitted defeat and said, like, we know that the specialists haven't really panned out how everyone wanted them to, but they also did say that we are committed to keeping the specialists. They're too ingrained within the game. Obviously the whole lore of the game is built around those specialists, so they're not removing the specialists, and that makes me think that they will probably try and pivot whatever plans they had to what the majority of the community seemed to want, which is like putting those specialists into different classes. So no official news on that, like I said, but they alluded to bigger changes, which is definitely a positive sign. Now, the stuff they did talk about though is actual changes to the look and the tone, and that is something that is very important. I know a lot of people will be like, oh, it doesn't matter, it's not really affecting gameplay, but it's beyond cringe the way that these characters like talk. They, you know, McKay's talking about him having cups of coffee. Like, this is World War III. They're not meant to be making jokes and stuff. Every now and then it would be fine, but it's like every sentence, it's just too much. So I'll show you some images on screen. They've pretty much overhauled the look of some of these characters. Like, McKay now no longer looks like Woody from Toy Story. He actually looks a bit grittier. He's got like some stubble and a bit of dirt on his face and stuff. Like, he looks a lot more intimidating. Still looks a bit like I want to punch him in the face, but he looks at least not like Woody. And then Boris has changed. I don't think he's actually probably one of the few characters that I think looked like he was suited for a World War III already. So it was a weird one to show off with Boris because I didn't think he really needed to change, but it still looks good, still looks better than it did. And I'd imagine they're making those changes to essentially all the specialists. Plus they have also shown a little bit of a clip of actual like voice line changes that they're making. I'll play a clip that they showed of Angel before and after the tone changes for these voice lines.
Look at this serious team, hey? Let's have fun. You need supplies? I'm your man.
Overall, again, when it comes to the tone and all that kind of thing with the specialists, this is definitely the step that they needed to take, and I'm glad they finally have made that step. When we're actually going to see these updates, I'm not 100% sure. I'm pretty sure it will be in Season 1, but they didn't actually say, you know, if it'll be right at the start or towards the end. I'm not too sure. So definitely good news, and hopefully we can hear some bigger stuff later on when it comes to actually changing the way the specialist system works. Now, the last thing they showed off for the core gameplay was actually some animation changes, which is something that I don't think anyone really expected. They've pretty much showed, and I'll show all of this on screen again, obviously, they're changing a lot of the ways that the characters are animated, which this was the part that grabbed me the most as to like how far they're actually going to fix this game. They didn't have to do this kind of thing. This is not the type of thing that anyone was really calling for, and I think we all agree that the animations have looked goofy since launch. I think we all understand that it's not quite up to scratch, but it's not the type of thing that everyone was like really crying out for, and the fact that they are changing this essentially without anyone even asking them to do that, it kind of shows that they are dedicated and they want this game to be polished. They're not just doing, you know, if we ask, can you change this, they're not just doing what we want, they're also doing stuff that they think isn't up to the standards that they've set in previous games. So I'm a big fan of the changes that they showed for the animations. Again, this isn't like the biggest thing, this isn't going to drastically change the game, but it's all these smaller things, they do all add up. And I think after like a year or so more of, you know, updates and new content and all that kind of thing, a year from now this game is going to be in a lot better state if they do this kind of stuff and do it successfully. Obviously it all needs to go to plan, so let's hope that they don't these animations don't come in and then they're all buggy and they look stupid or something, who knows. But all these smaller fixes that they're doing, like these animation changes, this is the stuff that to me does show they are really committed to this. They did not have to do all this kind of thing, and although it's not drastic to the changes to the gameplay and all that kind of thing, it's those little sort of 1%ers that do really add up to the quality of the game overall. Now, the last section they touched on was obviously to do with new content. We didn't necessarily get any like definite dates for any of this stuff, but they showed a quick little roadmap, and we can confirm that Season 1 is going to be getting a new map, a new specialist, new weapons, and I'll touch on the weapons even more in a second. We're obviously getting a battle pass, and then we're also just going to get more weekly missions and like community spotlights in Portal and all that kind of thing. They're really kind of trying to double down on the, I guess, like stuff to do in the game. Obviously you can just go and play the game and that's fine, but having actual stuff to grind for, having the weekly missions to complete, all that kind of thing, they seem to be doubling down on that, which is really good. Now, touching on the weapons, I think we all knew we were getting weapons in the seasons. That's, you know, something we all expected, but something that I know myself and Sage on the Battlefield Show podcast, we've talked about, why don't they add the Portal weapons into All Out Warfare? It actually suits the lore of the world. Obviously, like, this is a bunch of people who aren't necessarily soldiers and they've been called to go to war because obviously the world's gone to shit. So it actually kind of makes sense to have like AK-47s and a bunch of stuff that's in Portal from the games like Bad Company 2 and Battlefield 3, for example. And yeah, it actually makes sense to have those weapons in this war because not everyone's going to have the most up-to-date weapons. And on top of that, just having more weapons in the game from, like, not from a lore standpoint, but from just a player standpoint, having more weapons is a good thing as well. So they did confirm there are a lot of weapons coming from Portal into actual all-out warfare. So for example, like the AK-74U or the AKS-74U, I think it's called in this game, they are going to be adding weapons like those. They didn't confirm that specific weapon, so I probably shouldn't have said that, but they have confirmed that the Portal weapons, again, not probably all of them, but a lot of those weapons are coming to all-out warfare. That is a really, really solid change, and that's something that I have been sort of calling for, and I was almost going to make a video on that a few months ago, and I kind of wish I did because it would have looked really smart right now. But it's kind of, when you actually think about it, a no-brainer. Like, it suits the lore. They're already in the game. They obviously will need to do some slight adjustments to like the balancing of them, but they're already in the game. They don't need to completely redesign them or anything like that, and it would, you know, increase our weapon count drastically. So it's a very good decision in my opinion, and I'm really excited to hear more about like what weapons we're getting. I would love to get every single weapon. I don't think we will, but in my opinion, they essentially all make sense. Like, people these days are still using a lot of those weapons, like the MP5 and stuff like that. It's not that outlandish to have an MP5 in the year 2042, especially when the world's gone to shit and all these soldiers are just like grabbing whatever weapon they can because they're not necessarily all actual soldiers. And, you know, there's not going to be that many manufacturers that are still making these weapons they're using, so it kind of makes sense to just have a lot of those older weapons and just use whatever you can to fight this war. So really, really happy with that decision, and like I said, I'm very keen to see what weapons we actually get. We could honestly like double the weapon count, which is really, really awesome to think about, so I'll definitely be keeping my eyes peeled for that one. Now, just to summarize what we're actually getting in Season 1, like I said, we're getting a new map, a new specialist, new weapons, which I guess is going to be genuine new weapons, as well as potentially some of those Portal weapons as well, the battle pass, and then also the animation improvements, traversal improvements, which they didn't really touch on, but I think they will be going into that in the next update, and then also the Kaleidoscope like updated version. So all of that is coming in Season 1. Season 1 is starting in June and it runs through to August, so June is literally like 5 days away as we speak. I'd imagine the update will probably be, I mean, they said early June, but like, it's DICE, so yeah, I'm not sure when that'll be. It'll be probably 2 to 3 weeks from this video though, so not too far until then. And like I said, we don't know when we're getting each specific thing they mentioned, so the new map might not launch in that first update, for example. It might be like the new specialist and 2 new weapons and a bunch of like fixes, and then maybe in the July update, that's when we get the new map. Not 100% sure, but I think everyone just needs to like temper their expectations that we are getting this stuff, but it's not going to be, yeah, it potentially might not launch all at once, and when they say new weapons, it might literally just only be 2 weapons, so I think we all just need to, yeah, temper our expectations, and hopefully we all get proven wrong and the map launches in 3 weeks, who knows, but I'm definitely just trying not to get my hopes up because I've been burned way too many times in the past by DICE. So that essentially summarizes all of the stuff that they went through today. Like I said, if you want to watch the actual video of them breaking it down, they had Freeman, who is one of the community managers. They had Mr. Battlefield himself, Lars Gustafsson, and then I actually apologize, I forget the name of the other dev they had. I think he was a senior producer, and they went through a bunch of really interesting stuff. So I'll leave the link to that in the description if you guys want to go and watch that whole video as well. But yeah, overall, very, very positive signs, and this is the type of stuff this game needs. So I'm very keen to see how this all pans out. I'm keen to hear what you guys think of all this news though. Obviously, there's always going to be some very differing opinions, so definitely leave your thoughts down in the comments about all of this news. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you guys are new to the channel, then definitely hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications. If you want to support the content that I make here on YouTube, then consider becoming a channel member. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you all out there on the battlefield.